All right, so I'm going to use one of Boulder's projects that ultimately went defunct as kind of a platform to tell you where we are now. So we've all been to that place where, you know, you're stuck between a rock and a hard spot and you really don't know what the solution should be, but the only solution that can be is to move forward. And you're going to have a myriad of options of what moving forward looks like, and you're going to have skeptics and supporters no matter what decision you choose. So that's where Boulder was back in 2013. Just a little bit of backstory here is that the City of Boulder did not until 2015 have a formalized public art program. And so in integrating public art into various places around the city, it was all ad hoc by various departments. So the library, the main Boulder Public Library, was undergoing a significant restoration and decided to utilize the best practices advertised by Americans for the Arts in selecting an artist for this project and using a 1% budget. So that's 1% of the overall construction budget for the project. It was a great process. I'm still going to defend this. But the city, you know, had a project-specific selection panel, went through an open call, had proposals developed specifically for the site. And the artist team that was determined was R&R Studios out of Miami, Rosario Marcart and Roberto Bejar. Fantastic group. And so they wanted to really kind of move the needle on what the experience of public art is within the city of Boulder. Traditionally, there were a lot of bronzes that were donated, figurative and a lot of bronze animals as well. And then a lot of artist-designed handrails, but nothing beyond that in terms of what the artistic experience is within our community, which is interesting because Boulder, much like Iowa City, is very much known for being a place to be a creative. So as soon as the design was revealed, we have a rather vocal community. For example, I'm going to go to my prairie dog slide real quick. So within Boulder, we have prairie dogs. It's much like a squirrel here. But just to tell you how engaged our community is that we have a 12-member community board called the Prairie Dog Working Committee that writes rules and policies and procedures on what to do with relocation and humane treatment of prairie dogs. So we have a vocal community. So going back to the YES project, what happens is that there's a lot of opportunities for public engagement, much like this. City Hall, you come to council chambers, you have 3 minutes, you speak up. There was a small but very vocal group of individuals that decided that this proposal was in fact not art, but perhaps a sign instead. And so at the time, there was no protection for public art or for the process. So unfortunately, we had to terminate the contract with the artist and cancel this project altogether. But it made for a great opportunity because at the same time, the Office of Arts and Culture was embarking on a community cultural plan in which we engaged with over 2,000 community members that otherwise, you know, might not have time or interest to engage in the traditional forum that our city typically responds to, in which you come to city council and you speak up. So this was engaging with individuals from across the community to really understand what our community wanted in terms of arts and culture and how the government should interface with that. There became 6 priorities from the community, and we decided to focus on 8 strategies of how to help support that through the Office of Arts and Culture, and one of which was to reinvent the public art program. They were tired of having things faceplant, quite frankly. Since the 70s, we'd been trying to introduce a % for art rule. Never happened. A lot of projects either got momentum and then just had to kind of be tucked away, or some of the designs just never got realized to the extent that they should have been. So not only in reinventing the public art program is it about commissioning, but it's also about maintenance and conservation and the legacy and the relationships that you build with the artists and the community collectively. So this was happening on one side of the scope of how public art got to where it is now. And at the other time, the funds from the Permanent Commission through R&R Studios were then reallocated into a bunch of temporary interventions, which we call experiments in public art, using the city as a laboratory, which, you know, it's a university town. We'd like research. And so we were doing a bunch of temporary projects to really kind of say, does it have to be a figurative bronze? What else could the potential be? So this is Emma Hardy, who's a local artist, and it's important to note that the projects themselves, we needed to have a diversity of artists, a diversity of materials, a diversity of duration and experience. So Emma Hardy was local, but they were also regional artists, national artists, and international artists as well. She actually works primarily in bronze, but decided to make these extra large beetles to reference our sister cities and their puppets. So they're about 8 feet tall and wandered around town and just was an element for engagement. We also had artist Matthew Mazzata out of New York. He turned his into more of a residency approach, in which he came to Boulder, lived there for 3 months, and said, you know, the 3 themes that I'm seeing within this community is that you have one of the highest concentration of federal research labs, you love food, and you love the outdoors. So what's the conversation happening within those 3 disciplines simultaneously? So he then partnered with 3 restaurant owners, Rowdy Mermaid Kombucha, Shine Restaurant, and then Fortuna Chocolate, and developed a menu that had only 3 items on it, and of each item, there was an ingredient that's anticipated for extinction, an ingredient native to Boulder, but anticipated for extinction due to climate change within the next 20 to 40 years. So we moved this table around and had folks just show up. We didn't blatantly advertise it. I kind of like to go the guerrilla tactics. And so another piece about this project is that it was self-serve. So there's kind of this weird psychological angle that we took on it too, of like, are you going to engage or not? And for Matthew, it was much more about the conversations that happened at the table, as opposed to the fact that it's what he was serving and what story he was telling. He wanted it to be more about the artist's story. We also did the Knitting Ballet by Ana Maria Hernando. What happened with Anna's work is that she was getting really fed up with our sign code and development services. So this is the story in which not only are we learning, we as the city learning about what public art can be, the artists are learning, but our community is also learning. And so it's a great opportunity for us to realize that there are plenty of roadblocks within our zoning regulations, within our municipal code. The list went on and on. She was like, all right, I'm tired of this. I don't want to do my painting in the public realm because it's being interpreted as a sign. So let's go rogue. So what she did is commission some tango dancers to kind of wander along the 2 most trafficked bus routes during rush hour, to kind of just disrupt your daily routine and what came of that. And it was a curious project, but it left with a lot of people smiling and going, wait, you're saying the city did this? Why would the city do that? So that was interesting. And then we also worked with Rebecca Dominico. She did more of a traditional piece, in which it was a sculpture, installed it into a garden bed on our Ped Mall, which is much like Iowa City's. However, she then partnered with Naropa University, which for comparison is quite comparable to the Maharishi University here, and did exquisite corpse poetry about the cosmos. And so we all met downtown one day and just read under the moonlight. And then another very bizarre project is the Urban Preserve of Boulder. I'm not going to linger on this one because it has many layers, but I have a catalog of it. And this was by the art guys. And see that little triangle in that intersection? They decided to name that an urban preserve because who gets to say that the 45,000 acres that we have of open space is worthy, but that's not worthy of being designated as a very urban but preserved space. So they researched it. They had a scholarly article written about it, put together a book, and had selfie days in which it was layers upon layers of what it means to physically go to a space versus just virtually visit a space. And then we also worked with Mary Mattingly. This project, again, we actually housed on private property as opposed to city property because of how many interruptions it would have received if it had to go through zoning and permitting. It's called Everything at Once, and it's using a decommissioned military trailer, and then wood from a public school that could no longer get enough funding to stay in service and operation in Wisconsin. And so she was taking that conversation of where our priorities are from a federal level in terms of investment, and put it into a strange parking lot. This would be similar to siting it at the old Menards building. And put a meditative reflecting pool in there to help people try and have that conversation. So that was a very, very brief summary of 6 of the 12 projects we did through experiments in public art. From there, the goal was, maybe it wasn't the goal, but what resulted is the strategy is kind of inundating all of us simultaneously with all of these different ideas and practices and what to do and how to really engage in conversation. It was much more about the conversation and the commitment to our collective community to make a public art program that fits our community. So then we've invented the Creative Neighborhoods, which it's all on private property, stipend for an artist to paint on residential spots, and all of that is run through the agreement between the artist and the resident. We just provide a stipend. Over the course of 2017 and 2018, again, continuing with the theme of inundation, we slammed a bunch of projects out with community engagement, and this is where we are now. So we've come a long way from having one project that gave us a black eye. And now it's kind of exhausting, but this is where we are. So if you have any questions, I brought some cultural plans, some buttons, some stickers, some experiments, and then here's my contact information. So thank you.